I thought I knew everything about my father, till a DNA test revealed he had a whole other family I never knew existed. What I discovered did and just changed my life. It shattered everything I believed about the man who raised me.
Growing up, I was daddy's little girl. My name is Sarah. I'm 34 now, and for most of my life, I thought I had the perfect family story.
My dad, Robert, was this larger-than-life figure, a traveling salesman who worked in medical equipment. Always bringing home stories from different cities and small gifts from his business trips. Mom would joke that he collected friends like souvenirs, always talking about the wonderful people he'd meet on the road. We lived in a cozy suburban house in Ohio, and I was an only child. Well, I thought I was. Dad always said he wanted more kids, but Mom had complications after I was born, so it was just the three of us. He'd ruffle my hair and say, "You're all I need, kiddo. You're my whole world." And I believed him completely. Dad was the kind of father who never missed a school play, who taught me to ride a bike by running alongside me for what felt like hours, who would sit with me during thunderstorms because I was terrified of lightning. He had this warm laugh that filled up our entire house, and when he'd come home from his business trips, which were frequent, sometimes lasting 2 weeks at a time, he'd sweep me up in these massive bear hugs that smelled like his cologne and airport coffee. Mom Linda was the steady presence. Where Dad was all energy and stories, she was quiet strength. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and had this way of making everything feel safe and normal. When I'd ask why Dad traveled so much, she'd just smile and say, "That's how Daddy takes care of us, sweetheart. He's building our future." Their love story was something out of a movie, at least the way they told it. They met at a hospital charity event in the early 80s. Mom was working the event as a volunteer, and Dad was there representing his company. He always said he knew she was the one the moment he saw her organizing. The silent auction with this determined look on her face. "Your mother could organize chaos," he'd tell me with that sparkle in his eyes. They dated for 2 years before getting married, and I came along 3 years later. Dad would show me their wedding album. This thick, leather-bound book filled with photos of them looking impossibly young and happy. Mom in her flowing white dress, Dad in his navy suit with that same warm smile I knew so well. All their friends and family surrounding them, celebrating what seemed like a perfect beginning. As I got older, Dad's work seemed to expand. He'd be gone more often, covering larger territories. "Business is booming," he'd say, and Mom would nod approvingly. "We're saving for your college fund, sweetie." And it was true. They never seemed stressed about money. We took nice vacations. I had everything I needed, and there was always talk about the future they were building for our family. I never questioned the phone calls he'd take in the other room, or the way he'd sometimes seem distant when he first came home from trips, like his mind was still somewhere else. Mom never seemed bothered by it, so neither was I. That was just Dad. Always thinking, always working, always providing for us. The house was filled with evidence of his travels, postcards from different cities stuck to our refrigerator, small figurines from gift shops lining the windowsill in the living room, and stories. Oh, the stories he'd tell at dinner about the interesting people he'd meet, the funny things that would happen at conferences, the beautiful places he'd seen. I felt like I was traveling with him through those stories. When I graduated high school, Dad cried. Actually cried. Pulled me aside after the ceremony and said, "Sarah, you're going to do amazing things. You're smart like your mother, and determined like both of us. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't do something." It was one of those moments that gets burned into your memory, you know? The pride in his voice, the way his hands shook slightly as he adjusted my graduation cap. College came and went. I got my degree in marketing, started my career, even got married to a wonderful man named David when I was 28. Dad walked me down the aisle with that same pride radiating from every step. During his father of bride speech, he talked about how I had always been his greatest achievement and how grateful he was to have had the privilege of being my father. By this point, Dad was in his early 60s and talking about retirement. The travel was getting harder on him, and Mom was encouraging him to slow down. "We've built a good life," she'd say. "Maybe it's time to enjoy it." He seemed ready for that next chapter, talking about the projects he wanted to do around the house, the trips he and Mom could take together. Real trips, for pleasure instead of work. Everything seemed so solid, so perfectly normal. I had the kind of childhood that my friends would sometimes envy. 2 parents who clearly loved each other and me. Financial stability, a house full of laughter and warmth. Even as an adult, I'd call home at least twice a week. Dad would always end our conversations the same way. Love you, kiddo. You're my pride and joy. I thought I knew my father completely. I thought I knew our family's story. I was about to discover that I didn't know anything at all. The first crack in my perfect family picture appeared at Dad's 65th birthday party. Mom had thrown him this surprise celebration at our house. Nothing huge, just close family and a few neighbors. Dad seemed genuinely touched, going around the room, hugging everyone, and telling stories about how much our little community meant to him. I was in the kitchen helping Mom with dessert when Mrs. Patterson, our next-door neighbor of 15 years, made an offhand comment that would haunt me for months. She was looking through the family photos Mom had scattered across the counter. You know how moms do? I'm trying to embarrass you with baby pictures. When she picked up this shot of Dad and me at my college graduation, "You know," she said, squinting at the photo, "Sarah looks so much like that other girl Robert used to show pictures of." What was her name? Emma? Or was it Emily?
Ash!
She looked up at Mom with this innocent curiosity. I always thought it was sweet how proud he was of both his daughters. The kitchen went dead silent. Mom's face went completely white, and she nearly dropped the cake she was holding. "What other girl?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Patterson immediately realized she'd said something wrong. Her face flushed red and she started backpedaling. "Oh, I must be confused. Sometimes when Robert would come back from his trips, he'd show pictures. But I must have mixed up stories, or maybe they were nieces, or, oh dear, I've said something wrong, haven't I?" Mom forced this tight smile and changed the subject. But I could see her hands shaking as she cut the cake. Mrs. Patterson left early. Clearly embarrassed, and I tried to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding. Dad had lots of friends from work, probably showed pictures of their kids all the time. People get mixed up. It happens. But the seed was planted. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. When Dad would come home from trips and we'd go through his photos, this was back when people still printed pictures. Before everything was digital, there would occasionally be shots that seemed out of place. A photo of a playground he claimed was at a hotel, but why would a business hotel have such an elaborate children's play area? Pictures of family restaurants in small towns, but Dad usually ate at chains or hotel restaurants when he was working. Then there was his phone behavior. Dad had always been protective of his phone, said it was because of work confidentiality, and that made sense. But I started noticing how he'd step outside to take certain calls, even when he was supposedly off duty on weekends. When the phone would ring during dinner, Mom would sometimes get this look on her face. Not angry. Exactly, but resigned, like she was bracing herself. I tried talking to Mom about Mrs. Patterson's comment, but she just brushed it off. "You know how mixed up she gets," Mom said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it. "Your father works with lots of people, shows pictures of you all the time." She probably saw photos of coworkers' children and got confused. But I could tell Mom was thinking about it too. She started asking more questions when Dad came home from trips. Casual questions, but pointed ones. "How was the conference? Who did you meet? Any interesting presentations?" She'd listened to his answers with this new intensity, like she was cataloging details. The breaking point came about 2 months after the birthday party. I was visiting for Sunday dinner, and Dad's phone rang during dessert. He glanced at it, and I saw this flash of something cross his face. Panic, guilt. He declined the call, but it rang again immediately. Same reaction, declined again. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Mom asked. Her voice was steady, but there was steel underneath it. "Just work stuff," Dad said, but his usual easy confidence was gone. "I'll deal with it later." The phone rang a third time. This time he turned it off completely. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who calls 3 times in a row during dinner on a Sunday evening for work? I found myself going down these mental rabbit holes, trying to piece together a picture that I wasn't even sure existed. Dad's frequent travel, the mysterious phone calls, Mrs. Patterson's comment about both his daughter's moms increasing tension. I started paying attention to Dad's schedule differently. I realized that some of his business trips were to the same small towns over and over again. When I'd ask about these repeat visits, he always had explanations, follow-up meetings, problem clients, expanded territories, but the explanations were getting more elaborate, more detailed than they used to be. The final straw came when I was helping Dad organize some old files in his home office. I was filing away expense reports when I noticed something odd. He had receipts for restaurants and hotels in cities where his company had no business, according to the client list I'd seen him reference before. When I asked about it, he got flustered in a way I'd never seen before. Sometimes the clients meet me halfway, he said, but he was avoiding eye contact. Or I have to make stops, for other reasons, supply pickups, that kind of thing. But I'd worked in business long enough to know that expense reports are pretty straightforward. You don't rack up hotel bills in random small towns for supply pickups. You do and have dinner at family restaurants alone when you're supposedly in town for a quick business meeting. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. The man who had been my hero, my example of integrity and love, might be living some kind of double life. The thought made me physically sick. I knew I had to find out the truth, but I also knew that whatever I discovered might destroy the family I thought I knew. Still, the not knowing was eating me alive. That's when I remembered seeing those Ancestry DNA test kits advertised everywhere. Maybe I thought, if there really was another family out there, DNA would reveal the truth in a way that no amount of detective work could. I had no idea what I was about to uncover. The decision to take a DNA test didn't happen overnight. For weeks after that Sunday dinner phone call incident, I found myself spiraling between doubt and determination. Part of me wanted to just pretend Mrs. Patterson had never said anything, that I hadn't noticed Dad's strange behavior, that our family was exactly what it had always seemed to be. But the other part of me, the part that had inherited Dad's curiosity and Mom's need for truth, couldn't let it go. I started researching DNA testing companies online during my lunch breaks at work, feeling like I was planning some kind of covert operation. Concestridina, 23andDM, Famotridina. There were so many options, each promising to unlock family secrets and connect you with relatives you never knew existed. The irony was unlost on me that I was hoping to use technology to discover if my father had been living a lie. The reviews were fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Story after story of people discovering half-siblings, secret adoptions, parents who weren't biological parents, entire family branches they never knew existed. Some stories had happy endings, tearful reunions, and expanded families. Others were devastating. Marriages destroyed, children learning their entire identities were built on lies. I bookmarked dozens of articles about NPEs, non-paternity events, or not parent expected, where DNA testing revealed that someone's biological father was who they thought. But that wasn't my situation. I was pretty sure Dad was my biological father. I looked too much like him for that to be a coincidence. What I was worried about was whether I was his only child. The more I researched, the more I realized how common these discoveries were becoming. DNA testing was revealing family secrets that had been buried for decades. The technology was essentially turning every family tree into a potential minefield of hidden truths. I must have put the DNA kit in my online shopping cart and removed it a dozen times over the course of 3 weeks. Each time I'd think about what I might discover and lose my nerve. Did I really want to know if Dad had another family? What would that mean for Mom? What would that mean for me? But then I'd remember Mrs. Patterson's innocent comment about Dad being proud of both his daughters. And I'd put the kit back in my cart. The decision finally crystallized during a phone call with my husband David. I'd been wrestling with whether to tell him what I suspected, not wanting to drag him into what might turn out to be nothing. But one evening, after I'd been particularly quiet and distracted, he asked me directly what was wrong. I told him everything. Mrs. Patterson's comment, Dad's phone behavior, the receipts I'd found, the growing tension I sensed between my parents. David listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions, but never making me feel crazy for having these suspicions. So what do you want to do? I think I want to take a DNA test, I said, the words coming out in a rush. Not to catch Dad in a lie, but to put my mind at ease. If there's nothing there, then I can stop driving myself crazy with conspiracy theories. And if there is something, then you'll deal with it, David finished. Whatever it is, we'll deal with it together. Having his support gave me the courage I needed. That night, I ordered the Ancestridina kit. The company promised results in 6 to 8 weeks, which felt both like an eternity and no time at all. When the kit arrived 3 days later, I stared at the small box for an hour before opening it. Inside was a simple plastic tube for the saliva sample and instructions that made the process seem almost mundane. Spit in tube, register online, mail back, wait for results. Such a simple process to potentially blow up my entire understanding of my family. I registered the kit online, creating an account that felt like opening Pandora's box. The website asked if I wanted to be contacted by DNA matches, if I wanted my results to be visible to others, if I wanted to build a family tree. Each question felt loaded with implications I wasn't ready to consider. The night I mailed the kit back was one of the longest of my life. David found me sitting at our kitchen table at 2 a.m., just staring at my laptop screen. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. "About 1,000,000 of them," I admitted. What if I'm wrong about all of this? What if I am just paranoid and I've convinced myself there is some conspiracy where there isn't one? I'll have spent all this time and emotional energy on nothing. And what if you're right? He asked. That was the question I'd been avoiding. Then everything I thought I knew about my family is a lie. Then my father, the man who raised me, who I love more than anyone, has been living a double life for my entire existence. Then my mother has either been betrayed in the worst possible way, or she's known all along and chosen to live with it. David reached across the table and took my hand. "Sarah, you're not the villain here. There are family secrets, you didn't create them. There's another family out there, you didn't cause that situation. All you're doing is trying to understand the truth." "But what if the truth is worse than not knowing?" I asked. "Maybe it will be at first," he said. "But don't you think whoever else might be out there deserves to know the truth too? If Dad really does have another family, if there really is another daughter somewhere, doesn't she have a right to know about you too?" That perspective hadn't occurred to me. I'd have been so focused on what this might mean for my family that I had unconsidered there might be someone else out there with questions of their own. Someone else who might be looking for answers about her father's mysterious other life. Over the following weeks, I found myself obsessively checking the Ancestrina website for updates. Sample received. Sample being processed. Results coming soon. Each notification felt like a step closer to either vindication or devastation. I didn't tell my parents about the test. I told myself I was protecting them from unnecessary worry in case nothing came of it. But honestly, I think I was protecting myself from having to explain my suspicions. If they turned out to be wrong, 6 weeks after I mailed the kit, I got the email. "Your DNA results are ready?" My hands were shaking as I clicked the link. I waited until David got home from work to open the results. I'd been staring at that email notification all day, my stomach churning every time I thought about clicking the link. When David walked through the door that evening, he took one look at my face and immediately understood. "They're ready?" he asked. I nodded, holding up my phone like it contained a live bomb. "Can't do this alone." We sat together on our couch, David's arm around my shoulders, as I logged into the Ancestrina website on my laptop. My hands were trembling so badly, I had to type my password 3 times. The homepage loaded with a cheerful banner. "Discover your family's story." The irony was almost laughable. I clicked on DNA results, and the screen filled with colorful pie charts showing my ethnic background. It's British, Irish, German, a small percentage of Scandinavian. Nothing surprising there. All consistent with what I knew about my family history. For a moment I felt a wave of relief. Maybe this whole thing really had been in my imagination, and I saw the section labeled DNA matches. The list showed hundreds of matches ranging from distant cousins with tiny percentages of shared DNA to closer relationships with more significant connections. At the very top of the list, marked with a special icon indicating a close family match, was a name that made my blood run cold. Emma Marie Collins. Predicted relationship. Half-sibling. Shared DNA. 1,847 centimorgans. I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour, but was probably only seconds. Emma. Mrs. Patterson had said Emma, hadn't she? Or Emily. She hadn't been confused at all. "David," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Look." He leaned closer to the screen, reading over my shoulder. I heard him inhale sharply. "Holy shit," he breathed. I clicked on Emma's profile with shaking fingers. Her account was public, and I could see she'd been active on the site recently. She'd uploaded a family tree, and as it loaded, I saw names I recognized. Robert William Peterson listed as her father, dates matching my dad's birth year exactly. But her mother was listed as Patricia Collins, not Linda Peterson. My mother wasn't my dad's only wife. He had another family. Emma's profile included a photo, a smiling woman about my age, with dark hair and my father's eyes. The resemblance was unmistakable. She had his nose, the same dimple in her chin that I had inherited, even the same way of tilting her head slightly when she smiled. Looking at her picture was like looking at an alternate version of myself. According to her family tree, Emma was born just 14 months after me. 14 months. While my mother was still recovering from my birth, still adjusting to new motherhood, my father was starting another family with another woman in another town. I scrolled through more of Emma's information in a daze. She lived in Michigan, about a 6-hour drive from our home in Ohio. Her mother, Patricia, had died 3 years ago. Cancer, according to a tribute post Emma had shared. Emma worked as a teacher, was married to someone named James, had 2 young children. But the detail that hit me like a physical blow was in her About Me section, looking for connections to my father's side of the family. Dad travels a lot for work and doesn't talk much about his relatives. Hoping to learn more about our family history, she was looking for us. She was looking for me, and she didn't even know it. David was quiet beside me, giving me space to process what we were seeing. Finally, he asked softly, "What do you want to do?" I couldn't answer. My entire worldview was reshaping itself in real time. The father I'd idolized wasn't just a traveling salesman. He was living a double life, so complete that he'd managed to maintain 2 families for over 30 years. All those business trips, all those phone calls he'd taken private, all those expense reports for random small towns, he'd been going home to his other family. The worst part was realizing how calculated it all had to be. This wasn't a one-time affair or a moment of weakness. This was a deliberate choice, sustained over decades, requiring constant lies and careful coordination. Every time he told me I was his whole world, or his only daughter, he was lying to my face. I started doing the math in my head, trying to piece together the timeline. Emma was born when I was just over a year old. That meant Dad had been with Patricia when I was a baby. When Mom was probably struggling with postpartum challenges and sleepless nights, while Mom thought her husband was building our future, he was building an entirely separate life with an entirely separate family. How many times had he tucked Emma into bed the same way he tucked me in? How many times had he told her she was his pride and joy? How many school plays and birthdays and milestones had he attended for both of us, keeping us completely separate and unaware of each other's existence? I thought about all the times Mom had seemed lonely when Dad was traveling. All the times she'd made excuses for his absences or defended his need to be away so much. Had she known? Had she suspected, or had she been just as deceived as I was? Looking at Emma's photos, seeing her children, my half-niece and half-nephew, I felt this strange mixture of betrayal and connection. These were my family members, people who shared my DNA, my features, possibly my mannerisms and personality traits, and I'd never known they existed. The messaging feature on Ancestry showed that Emma had been active on the site just 2 days ago. She was probably seeing the same close family match notification that I was seeing, probably staring at my profile with the same shock and confusion I was feeling. I realized I was crying. Not dramatic sobs, just tears streaming down my face as the reality settled in. My father wasn't who I thought he was. My family wasn't what I thought it was. And somewhere in Michigan, there was a woman who was probably having the exact same devastating realization. Sarah, David said gently, "There's a message." I looked where he was pointing. Emma had sent me a message through the site, time-stamped just 20 minutes ago. With trembling fingers, I clicked to open it. Emma's message was short and direct. "Hi, Sarah. I think we need to talk. My number is 517-555-0147. I'm free anytime today." Emma, I stared at those words for a long time, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it. The moment where theoretical became real, where suspicions became confirmed facts, where my carefully ordered world officially crumbled. I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been holding her phone, waiting. "Sarah?" Her voice was shaky but warm, with a slight Midwestern accent. "Hi," I managed to say. This is all pretty overwhelming. Tell me about it," she said, and I could hear her moving around, probably pacing like I was. I've been staring at your profile for hours. You look so much like him, like Dad. The way she said Dad, with the same affection I'd always felt, somehow made everything worse and better at the same time. We talked for 3 hours that first night. Emma told me about growing up with a father who traveled constantly for work, who showered her with attention when he was home, but was always leaving again. She told me about Patricia, her mother, who had died believing that Robert was sometimes distant because of work stress, never knowing about his other family. Mom used to joke that she was married to a ghost, Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. She'd say Dad was there just long enough to remind her why she loved him, then gone just long enough to make her miss him. The parallels to my own childhood were eerie. Emma's stories could have been my stories, just with different names and locations. The same elaborate explanations for extended absences, the same expensive gifts that seemed designed to compensate for missed time, the same promises that someday he'd travel less and be home more. But the most shocking revelation came when Emma told me about Patricia's death 3 years earlier. Dad was different after Mom died, she said. More present, somehow. He started talking about retirement, about wanting to spend more time with family. He even mentioned wanting me to meet some relatives from his side that I'd never known about. My stomach dropped. 3 years ago was exactly when my dad had started talking about retirement too, when he'd begun making comments about slowing down and enjoying life with family. Emma, I said carefully, has your dad mentioned anything recently about other family? Anyone he might want you to meet? There was a long pause. Actually, yes. Just last month he said something about having some extended family in Ohio that he'd lost touch with over the years. Said maybe it was time to reconnect. That family was the most important thing. Because he was planning to merge his 2 lives, I realized with horrifying clarity, with Patricia gone, Dad thought he could finally integrate his families. He's probably spinning some story about reconnecting with long-lost relatives. To explain why he'd suddenly introduced us to each other, we made plans to meet in person the following weekend. Emma would drive down to Ohio, and we'd figure out together how to confront our father with what we'd discovered. But I couldn't wait that long to talk to Dad. I showed up at my parents' house the next evening without calling first. Mom was at her book club, and Dad was in his office, working on what he claimed were retirement plans. When he saw me in the doorway, his face lit up with that familiar warm smile. "Kiddo, what a nice surprise. How are you? How's David?" I sat down across from his desk and looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see the man who had been living a double life for my entire existence. He looked the same as always. Kind eyes, graying hair, the slight stoop in his shoulders from years of travel. Now I knew the truth behind all those trips. "Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Something flickered across his face. Wariness, maybe recognition. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? Who is Emma Collins?" The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed several times without making any sound. Finally, in a voice I barely recognized, he whispered, what do you know about Emma?" "I know she's my half-sister," I said. "I know you have another family in Michigan. I know you've been lying to Mom and me for my entire life." He buried his face in his hands, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost then I remembered the 34 years of deception, and the anger returned. "Sarah, this isn't how I wanted you to find out. So you were planning to tell me?" I asked. "When? At your funeral?" "No, yes, I was planning to tell you. Patricia died 3 years ago, and I hoped maybe I could bring our families together. You and Emma, your sisters, you should know each other." The audacity of that statement left me speechless. He'd created this situation, maintained it through decades of lies, and now he wanted credit for planning to fix it. "Does Mom know?" I asked. He shook his head, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen him. "Linda doesn't know about Emma or Patricia. I couldn't figure out how to tell her. So Mom has been married to a lie for 37 years. It wasn't supposed to happen this way," he said, finally looking up at me. "I loved your mother. I love your mother. But I met Patricia when you were just a baby, and I fell in love with her too. I couldn't choose. I couldn't give up either family. So you decided to lie to both families instead. I provided for everyone," he said, as if that somehow made it better. "Both families were taken care of." I made sure everyone had what they needed. What we needed was honesty, I said, standing up. What we needed was a father who didn't live a lie every single day. I left him sitting in his office, looking broken and old. But I wasn't done. Now I had to tell Mom, and I had to figure out how to move forward with the sister I'd never known I had. The explosion was just beginning. The conversation with Mom was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I waited until the next evening after I'd had a day to process my confrontation with Dad and prepare for what was coming. David offered to be there for support, but this felt like something I needed to do alone. Mom was in the kitchen making her famous pot roast, the same recipe she'd been using for family dinners since I was a child. The normalcy of it, the domestic comfort, made what I was about to tell her feel even more devastating. "Mom, we need to talk," I said. Sitting down at the kitchen table where I'd done homework as a kid, where we'd had countless conversations about school and boys and dreams for the future, she must have heard something in my tone because she immediately turned off the stove and sat down across from me, her face already showing concern. I told her everything. The DNA test, Emma, the double life, my confrontation with Dad. I watched 37 years of marriage crumble in real time as the truth sank in. Mom didn't cry at first. She just got very quiet, very still, like she was turning to stone. "How long?" she finally asked. "Emma's 33, I said gently. So ... most of your marriage." That's when she broke down. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but this deep, quiet grief that seemed to come from somewhere I'd never seen before. I held her while she cried, both of us mourning the life we thought we'd had. But Mom surprised me with her strength. After the initial shock, she became determined to understand the full scope of Dad's deception. She wanted to see Emma's profile, wanted to know about Patricia, wanted every detail I could provide. It was like she was conducting an investigation into her own life. "I feel so stupid," she said at one point. "It's all those years, all those signs I must have missed or explained away. How could I not know?" "Because you trusted him," I said. "Because you loved him and believed what he told you." "That's not stupidity, Mom. That's just being a loving wife." The meeting with Emma that weekend was surreal. She drove down from Michigan, and we met at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our house and her hotel. Seeing her in person was like looking in a funhouse mirror. We had the same gestures, the same laugh, even some of the same expressions. Despite the circumstances, I felt an immediate connection to her. Emma brought photo albums from her childhood, and we spent hours comparing our parallel lives. Birthday parties that looked identical except for different faces in the background. Family vacations to similar destinations, sometimes during the same summers. Christmas mornings that followed the same traditions. Apparently, Dad had established identical routines for both families. "The weird thing is," Emma said, flipping through pictures of herself at various ages, "I always felt like something was missing, like Dad was holding back part of himself. I used to think it was just because of his work, but now I understand he literally was living another life. We decided together that we wanted a relationship with each other, regardless of what happened with our parents' marriages. We were innocent victims of Dad's choices, and we refused to let his deceptions rob us of the chance to be sisters." The confrontation with Dad, with both of us present, was unlike anything I could have imagined. He looked at us sitting side by side and started crying immediately. Not the manipulative tears of someone trying to avoid consequences, but the broken sobs of a man who finally understood the full weight of what he'd done. "You two should have grown up together," he said. "You should have known each other your whole lives. I robbed you of that, and I'll never forgive myself." Emma was more forgiving than I was, perhaps because she'd lost her mother and understood the fragility of family connections. "We can't change the past," she told him, "but we can decide what happens next."